The Scarecrow's Revenge. Jessica smoothed out the wrinkles in her floral print skirt as the Greyhound bus jostled down the uneven rural road. She peered out the dusty window at the passing fields lined with worn-down fences and the occasional farmhouse in need of a fresh coat of paint. "We must be getting close," she said to her older brother Mark, who was snoring in the seat next to her with his beat-up duffel bag on his lap. Mark snorted awake. "What makes you say that?" "I haven't seen another car for miles. I think we're officially in the middle of nowhere." Jessica and Mark were on their way to visit their estranged grandmother Martha for the first time in over 10 years, when she had sent the surprise invitation to come stay at her isolated farm. They were hesitant at first. Their grandmother had always been stern and severe, even cold during their childhood visits. But now that Martha was in her late 70s and the siblings were both adults, they thought maybe it was time to reconnect. The bus driver called back, "Folks, we're coming up on Willows Creek now. Anyone getting off here?" Jessica and Mark grabbed their bags and stepped off the bus into the glaring summer sun. The bus drove away spewing exhaust, leaving them coughing in a cloud of dust. As it settled, the siblings got their first look at the Willows Creek farm. The farmhouse was weathered gray with peeling white trim and a sagging front porch. The barn's red paint was faded to a dull rust color, and the fields beyond were overgrown with browning stalks of wheat and weeds. "Not exactly the picture of prosperity," Mark muttered. Before Jessica could reply, the front screen door creaked open and their grandmother Martha appeared. She was thinner than Jessica remembered, her shoulders hunched and stooped, but her steel gray hair was neatly pinned up, and her wrinkled face still held the same severe, piercing expression. "Well, don't just stand there gawking, come inside," Martha called out, her reedy voice carrying across the yard. Jessica shot Mark a hesitant look, then picked up her bag and headed towards the house. She noticed strange symbols carved into the door frame as they stepped inside the dim front hall. The interior had a musty, almost fungal smell and was cluttered with heavy, old-fashioned wooden furniture. "You two can put your things in the guest room, then come to the kitchen for some tea," Martha told them briskly. She didn't move to hug or greeting them beyond a cursory nod. Mark raised his eyebrows at Jessica as if to say, "Some things never change." They made their way down the creaky hallway to the guest room, which was just as dim and antiquated as the rest of the house. Mark flopped down on the brass bed and coughed as a cloud of dust rose up. "Quite the picturesque country vacation spot, eh, sis?" Jessica sighed. "Give it a chance, Mark. Maybe she just doesn't know how to show affection." In the kitchen, Martha poured hot tea from a dented kettle into chipped mugs. Jessica looked around at the shelves lining the walls, which were cluttered with jars of herbs and liquids, tall candles, and leather-bound books with symbols on them she didn't recognize. "So, Grandma, how have you been keeping busy out here?" Jessica asked, sipping the bitter tea. Martha's pale gray eyes surveyed them coldly. "I manage just fine. My scarecrows help keep the crows from the fields, and my remedies keep me healthy." "Remedies?" Mark asked. "Medicines and salves from my herbs and plants. People come from far and wide for them," Martha said cryptically. Jessica met Mark's skeptical look with a small shake of her head. "Let's just get through this visit," she thought. They made stilted small talk about Martha's garden and the old house until the grandfather clock chimed 6 times. "You two should get some rest. You'll be working in the fields tomorrow," Martha told them as she collected the mugs. "Work?" Mark said, frowning. "We're just here for a visit." Martha glared at him. Anyone who wants to stay here needs to help out. My scarecrows can only do so much." Jessica quickly said goodnight and pulled Mark away before he could argue. Lying in the lumpy guest bed that night, she thought about Martha's scarecrows. She had seen them earlier, posted at intervals around the weed-choked fields. With their sackcloth heads and outstretched arms, she found them unsettling. As she finally drifted off, Jessica thought for sure she saw the shadow of a scarecrow pass by the bedroom door. The next morning, Martha rapped on their door at dawn. "Time to get moving," she called through the wood. "I've got your chores waiting." Jessica dressed quickly in jeans and a flannel shirt, pulling her long hair back in a ponytail. She gulped down the hot tea and toast Martha had waiting before following her out to the barn. Mark trudged behind them, rubbing his eyes. "What delightful housework will we be doing today?" he muttered under his breath. Martha handed them each a wicker basket. "You two need to go gather some herbs for me. Rare plants that only grow deep in the forest. My stocks are running low." Jessica looked at the list of herbs and roots Martha had scrawled down. She didn't recognize any of the names. "How will we know what to look for?" she asked. Martha waved a hand impatiently. "You'll figure it out. Just head west into the woods there, and don't come back until you've found everything on that list." She turned and marched back toward the house, letting the screen door slam behind her. Mark crumpled up the list and shoved it in his pocket. What a loon. Let's just wander around the woods for a while to humor her and then head back. But as they walked away from the house towards the tree line, Jessica felt a prickle on the back of her neck like they were being watched. She turned and saw the scarecrows posted around the fields had all turned their burlap heads to stare after them. A chill went down her spine. Once under the shade of the trees, Jessica felt a little better. But after about an hour of hiking deeper into the forest, she had to admit they were lost. The trees all looked the same, and they hadn't passed any identifiable landmarks. Mark consulted the hand-drawn map Martha had given them, turning it around, trying to get oriented. "I think we should turn back. We clearly have no idea what we're doing out here." Jessica agreed. As annoying as their grandmother was being, the idea of wandering lost in the woods after dark was far worse. But when they turned around, even their own footprints had disappeared. The looming trees and brush seemed to have shifted closer together, obscuring any path. Jessica's heart started to pound. How were they going to find their way back to the house? Mark tried to strike out confidently in one direction, only to have them emerge back at the same small stream a few minutes later. "This is impossible!" he exclaimed, kicking a rock into the water. "It's like the woods are rearranging themselves to keep us lost." Jessica sank down on a fallen log, trying to stay calm. She just had to think logically to get them out of here. As the shadows started to lengthen, a snapped twig made her look up. "Did you hear that?" she asked Mark, who was pacing in frustration. He stopped. "Hear what?" There it was again, a crack of brush being stepped on, leaves softly crunching. Something was moving out there, just beyond view. Jessica shot to her feet. "We need to keep going, come on," she said, suddenly desperate to get away. Mark followed without argument as she struck off towards a glimpsed break in the trees. The sun sank lower, casting the woods in an ominous gloom. Strange noises seemed to follow them just out of sight. Right as true darkness fell, they stumbled into a small clearing. Jessica gasped and clutched Mark's arm. The clearing was filled with scarecrows, at least a dozen of them. Their sackcloth heads sat atop stuffed burlap bodies with sticks poking out for arms. As the siblings watched in horror, the scarecrows slowly creaked and turned their heads in unison towards Jessica and Mark. Their stitched mouths and painted-on eyes seemed to glare at them. Mark started edging back towards the trees. Okay, yeah, we need to get out of here now. But before they could run, the scarecrows started lurching forward, moving on their stuffed legs, straw poked out of holes ripped in the fabric. They descended on Jessica and Mark, reaching out with stick fingers to grab them. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest. This can't be real, she thought frantically. But the burlap hands grasping her arms felt very solid. She wrenched away and fled after Mark, who was already barreling back into the woods. Darting glances over her shoulder, Jessica saw the creatures were pursuing them. Their feet made soft thumps on the earth and their arms stayed weirdly outstretched. It was like something out of a nightmare. Gasping for breath, Jessica spotted the farmhouse through the trees ahead. Thank God. They had made it back. If they could just get inside, they would be safe. Wouldn't they? Jessica and Mark slammed into the front door shoulder first, tumbling into the front hall. Jessica scrambled to her feet to throw the lock shut behind them. Through the window, she could see the scarecrows break through the tree line, heading for the house. Their burlap faces were blank, but somehow still conveyed anger. "What the hell is happening?" Mark shouted, peering out the window with wide eyes. Jessica turned to see Martha sitting calmly at the kitchen table, sipping tea. "Back so soon? You should have stayed to play with my friends longer," she said with a small smile. Jessica marched over to her grandmother. "You had this planned all along, didn't you? Sending us into the woods like that. What are those scarecrows?" Martha regarded her coldly. "You came here uninvited, disrupted their home and their land. Now you must face the consequences." Before Jessica could reply, the front door shuddered under blows from the scarecrows outside. Their shrieks and rasps raised the hair on the back of her neck. Mark grabbed an antique shovel from by the fireplace to brace against the door as Martha slowly stood up. "We just wanted to visit family," Jessica pleaded. "Call them off, I'm begging you." Martha lifted her arms, the wide sleeves of her black dress falling away to reveal symbols tattooed on her skin. Her eyes rolled back as she started to chant in a harsh, guttural language Jessica didn't recognize. The air suddenly darkened like ink spilling across the walls. Shadowy human shapes seeped out, growing more solid and terrible. Their empty gaze locked onto Jessica and Mark as they drifted closer. The front door finally splintered open under the onslaught. The scarecrows poured in, writhing and twitching unnaturally. Martha shrieked out one final invocation before collapsing back into her chair. Mark swung the shovel at the nearest creature, but straw and old clothes simply burst apart before reforming. Their hands grabbed at Jessica's arms, her hair, her legs. She screamed and kicked, but couldn't break free. The last things she saw were the scarecrow's glowing eyes and her grandmother's wild smile as the darkness consumed her. At dawn, Martha emerged from the farmhouse clutching 2 burlap sacks. She made her way slowly across the field, leaning on her cane. Reaching the row of scarecrows, she stopped and pulled out a needle and thick black thread. With skilled fingers, she sewed together the sacks to create 2 new scarecrow heads before forcing them onto the poles next to the others. Stepping back, she nodded in satisfaction. The scarecrows' empty faces stared ahead in silence. But if one looked closely beneath the rough stitching, Jessica and Mark's features could still be seen, trapped forever in burlap and straw. Over the next week, neighbors from town commented that Martha seemed livelier, no longer hunched and frail. She moved with new vigor as she tended her garden and barn. When asked about her grandchildren visiting, Martha would get a strange, sly look on her face. "Oh, they're still here helping out," she would say. "They'll be staying with me from now on." The townspeople just assumed Martha was getting senile. But on the isolated farm, no one heard Jessica and Mark's muffled screams. No one saw them thrashing inside their burlap casings, unable to get free. Each night, Martha would bring the 2 newest scarecrows bowls of blood and meat to keep them strong. "Eat up, dearies," she would croon to them. "We have such work left to do." And so Jessica and Mark remained trapped on the farm, forced to spend their days and nights standing motionless and unheard in the fields. Their grandmother's revenge was complete. The old magics held strong, and no one would ever leave Willow Creek again. Beware the darkness that dwells within even family, for it may dig in its roots and never let go. Though blood may bind us, darkness knows no kin. When shadows stir in the hearts of those once held dear, peril awaits. Be wary of evil taking familiar form, and heed not false refuge found in family ties. For the ancient roots of malice run deep through ancestral soil, waiting to rise again and ensnare any who stray near. Blood alone cannot ward off the night creatures that come creeping from within, so trust not in name alone, but look to one's deeds, for there the truth resides. Please like, share, and subscribe for more creepy tales from the Netherworld. Thanks for your support. Until next time, sweet dreams.